I'm continuing about emotional development, and I want to be able to make some suggestions about what you could do to promote it, and at the same time, how to use this knowledge to give you some ideas about how to deal with children, because any parent knows who's been a parent for any length of time, managing children's emotions is one of the most wearing plus most interesting tasks parents face. So first of all, let's talk about helping children identify their own emotions. Now, the reason for doing that is because emotions are related to behavior, and so when you help a child learn about the emotion of love or happiness or sadness or anxiety, then they can understand a little bit about what's happening to them by watching themselves act and the people that they observe. So, first of all, why should you help your children identify their own feelings or emotions? Well, the one reason is because it helps them handle life better. They know what they're feeling and they can talk about them better. So as children develop and grow, emotions become a little bit more complex, but they also become more identifiable so that you can help your children learn. And here's what you do. You get a list of positive emotions and you teach, here's what love is and here's what love looks like or could look like. And you teach your children to name their emotions and so on. Then when they do that, you'll notice that they can also be better at identifying other people's emotions, which, as you might expect, that is related to very positive things like compassion or tenderness or empathy and so on, which I'll talk about later. So when parents actively teach children about their emotions, it builds your relationship with them, and it also gives you a chance to influence them in ways that you don't have if all you do is just try to make them follow your rules, for example. So here's one thing you can do, and here's something creative parents did. They wrote about 40 emotions, and you think, gee, I didn't know there was that many. Well, if you Googled emotions, you could find about 1,800 of them online. But the positive ones, like get about 35 positive and 5 that are negative, like anxious and so on. Then when your children are old enough and you're teaching them emotions, practice pantomiming them so that you express them and have them guess what they are. Then you have them express them so you can guess. So when they're clear, now imagine what's happening. When you're clear about your emotions, you're more accurate in your communication with others, and your perception of other people is more accurate. So you play this emotion game and they learn more about emotions, and then during the week catch them with a feeling, say, well, you seem to be happy. I know a parent who calls them you seem to be's, and so he or she will say, you seem to be happy, you seem to be excited and so on. And when you're right, your children think, my dad knows me, my mother knows me, and they feel safer. So now let's move on to self-regulation. How do children learn to manage their emotions? I would like to point out to you that virtually every healthy person has boundaries. Some have boundaries so tight they don't express any emotion. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about limits to anger and limits to, say, anxiety or depressed moods, or even limits to how you express love and so on, so that you have a sense of self-control in regard to them. So here's what you do. You teach them about emotions, and then you teach them about emotions for specific situations. Here's what these emotions are good. You can display these at a baseball game. You can display these with your friends. You can display these. And so when a young child has a problem with a friend, deal with it not just with the behavior, but with the feelings that are involved. Well, how did you express this? And how did your friend express that? So you give them a chance to talk about how feelings are being expressed. Words help them regulate. But sometimes you have to impose control over really intense emotions like anger and tantrums and something like that. So here are some strategies that wise parents use to help their children control themselves. Some parents have their kids memorize a little statement like, birds of a feather flock together, or when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And they have the child say that just before they get angry to see if they can control the anger. Or when anger gets intense and children don't control, one parent did the following, which I thought was interesting. She had a son who just got volatile, and so she decided that she would get him, have him lie on the floor on where there's a carpet and soft. Then she straddled him, and she just got a sandwich and a glass of milk, and she would say to him, "Now, I want you to learn to control your anger, and I am your mother. I am your mother." And when he would get upset and say, "Please let me out," she would say, "No, we're going to stay here for a while." And then he decided he needed to go to the bathroom, and she said, "I'll only do that if you promise to come back and get underneath me again." So I said, "Why did you do that?" And she said, "Well, some kids need to learn to control their emotions through the cells of their bodies," which I thought was pretty wise. And so she did that, and then she began to use a chair. And when the child would get out of control, she'd put him on a chair, straddle him, and say, "You need to stay here until you can get yourself under control." "Well, why didn't you give him a time?" I asked. She said, "Because if I give him a time, if he's not in control by 20 minutes, he'll want to get off." So I thought that was pretty clever as well. Now, another set of parents did self-regulation by practicing. In this case, the parents took a child, about 5, to a restaurant, got upset, made a big mess. They left, embarrassed, went home, and the mother said, "Well, I'm never taking him to a restaurant again." The father said, "No, that's exactly what not to do. So let's practice restaurant at home, and then we'll take him back to that very one." So they did, and they did it over and over again until he could control his emotions in the restaurant. Now, why empathy? So far, I've talked about identifying emotions. I've talked about the idea of regulating them and controlling them. Your example, it's important in all of these, and now empathy. Well, empathy comes from you recognizing your child's emotions, feeling part of what that child is feeling, and letting your child have that experience. And then the child will do the same. Well, how do you teach that? Well, you can ask a child while you're watching a TV program, stop it and say, "Now, what is that woman feeling right there? What is that little boy feeling?" So that you train your children to pay attention to other people's feelings. Now, why do that? Most bad behavior of children occur when they're emotionally isolated from other people. When you teach children to be emotionally connected with others, what you're teaching them is to be law-abiding and to be healthy human beings. So you teach them about empathy. You set an example of doing it. And then what you get is a variety of forms of pro-social behavior. So how do parents teach that? Well, I know parents who annually, more often actually, but annually take their children to do some service for some people, homeless people or people who have needs and so on. So one set of parents, the grandmother made quilts. And so when she finished the quilt, she wanted to donate them to an organization called Sleep in Heavenly Peace. And this organization provided beds and quilts for immigrants who didn't have any. Well, this mother got the blankets or quilts from her mother and had the child carry them and give them to the person who managed that program. So we're teaching about empathy. So far I've said identify emotions, learn to help your children regulate them, and develop empathy. And what you get are children with high esteem, pro-social behavior, and confidence because they can manage themselves.